now it's my pleasure to introduce Val Jensen. As I mentioned, Val authored the paper that we recently released, Rethinking Energy Efficiency as a Carbon Resource. The paper also includes perspectives from 5 technology companies: eSource, Google, Oracle Utilities, Powerly, and Uplight. Val is a former Senior Vice President of Strategy and Policy for Exelon Utilities and is currently a Senior Fellow with ICF. I want to thank Val for really advancing these ideas around why it is so critical today to recognize energy efficiency, as a carbon resource, especially as we are seeing a push towards electrification of end-use technologies and transportation electrification. So with that, I am pleased to introduce Val Jensen. Val, the floor is yours.
Very much, and thanks, Bob, for having me and giving me the chance to work on this fascinating subject. I noticed Dave Nemso had joined, and so before I go any further, I just want to say for Dave's benefit that the solution to the challenges I'm going to talk about all essentially boil down to flexible demand and call now and
my work here is done. Thank you, Val.
Yeah, you're welcome. But I'm sure for virtually everyone on the call, we would agree that energy efficiency has been an unqualified success in reducing inefficient electricity consumption and reducing both criteria years. But if the industry is committed, which it is, to decarbonization and facilitation of substantially more distributed energy resources in a dynamic grid, there's no question but that we're going to need a substantial increase in the amount of energy efficiency over and above what we've already acquired. And for those companies that do assume responsibility for boosting energy efficiency, it's clear that the current flavor of energy efficiency, the current way that we approach energy efficiency, is not going to be sufficient to drive a significant increase in savings, and as Lisa said, to align with the efforts going on in many states with respect to beneficial electrification and the management of an increasingly dynamic grid. The paper that I put together lays out 2 broad challenges. First, a set of policy challenges, and Mike, you can flip to the next slide if you'd like. Policy challenges, beginning with the old and always relevant question of business models. Despite the fact that over half of the states now have some form of policy that allows utilities not only to recover the costs of energy efficiency, but to recoup lost revenues and in many cases earn financial incentives, a lot of utilities still do not. Their business models are misaligned with the desire to promote energy efficiency. They lose money on every kilowatt hour saved. So there is that issue, which we don't really deal with to any great extent in the paper. It's been explored extensively elsewhere. There are 2 other policy challenges. The first, which has already been hinted at, is the inconsistency of objectives in the state policy frameworks promoting energy efficiency. Electricity sales. However, today it's increasingly important in a world pursuing decarbonization strategies to also pursue beneficial electrification. And in a number of states, particularly those in which I worked for many years, it is actually contrary to existing statute to pursue for promoting electrification of end uses that actually help reduce carbon. So there's a problem of inconsistent objectives, and then there are antiquated objectives. Again, it's no longer a world in which just saving a kilowatt hour at any time at any place is sufficient. There's increasingly a premium put on when and where those kilowatt hours are saved. There are objectives at the state level with respect to economic development, with respect to diversity and inclusion, with respect to community building, all of which need to be reconciled, in this new framework for energy efficiency. There's also a long set of policy or program challenges that faces. Historically, the approach to energy efficiency portfolio building focused on a technology-based rebate strategy. We would hand out money to customers who technology. And that general approach has prevailed over the last 40 years, with the exception of some fairly exciting work that's been done with respect to behavioral energy efficiency programs in maybe the last decade. So a series of challenges programmatically to being able to boost the output of reliance on technology-based programs. A lot of the easy and inexpensive program savings have already been captured, particularly in states on the two coasts that have been engaged in energy efficiency for decades. And as a result, incremental savings are starting to get much more expensive. I think business utilities and others have started to move toward whole building sorts of programs and their measure mixes, but the result of that is that these programs are becoming much more expensive on a cost per kilowatt hour saved basis. Acquisition costs similarly are rising as the first tranches of customers have taken advantage of these programs. So overall, what we're starting to see across the country is a pretty significant rise in the percentage of revenues that utilities are devoting to energy efficiency. Maybe 10 years ago, it was rare to see a utility spending more than 2% of annual revenue on energy efficiency, and today you see some of the more aggressive utilities on the East Coast particularly, but also beginning in California, spending upwards of 6% of annual revenue on energy efficiency. And so certainly to hit decarbonization targets, we're going to have to approach that level of spending across the country. A second issue with respect to efficiency programming has to do with the way that programs are designed. And historically, from my experience, energy efficiency programs are designed to meet evaluator expectations. Programs that provide rebates for the installation of efficient equipment are by and large relatively easy to evaluate, and to a utility energy efficiency executive, not getting dinged by a regulator is probably the most important objective that those executives face. And as a result, we have a bunch of energy efficiency programs that, while relatively straightforward to evaluate, are not necessarily very innovative, and that focus on being able to evaluate programs, in fact, impedes innovation. And finally, the practical manifestation of the conflicting objectives on the policy side is that portfolio designs tend to stay away from promoting more efficient technologies that would also involve a switch in fuels. In the utilities in which I was active, running energy efficiency programs, we were not allowed to pursue electrification of heating, for example, in buildings, even though that would have been a much more efficient solution because it promoted fuel switching. So given those challenges, and Mike, I saw a note pop up. So fortunately, there are a number of solutions in play across the country to solve both C and programmatic. With respect to clarifying and reconciling objectives, particularly when it comes to electrification, there's been a lot of interesting work that's happened over the last couple of years that give equal weight to promoting beneficial electrification as they do to energy efficiency. And our friends in SMUD in California have actually been the first utility to move away from a purely electric energy efficiency objective to one that's based on saving carbon. So the utility's objective is to reduce carbon emissions as opposed to reducing electricity sales. Less discussed, perhaps, but certainly aligned with that first potential solution to a policy challenge is the need to modify cost-effectiveness criteria to recognize the value of flexible demand, for example. The way cost-effectiveness tests historically have been constructed, increases in electricity use were penalized in the cost-effectiveness tests. And as we all know, both for purposes of dynamic grid management and decarbonization, sometimes it does in fact make sense to shift electricity consumption and potentially even increase it at certain periods of the day, which would, under many existing cost effectiveness models be penalized. And finally, as regulators and policymakers assign utilities increasing numbers of objectives that are unrelated to simply delivering kilowatt hours, we have to recognize that the utility business model is going to have to evolve. Utilities cannot simultaneously have a business that makes its money by selling kilowatt hours and yet be mandated by that sale of the kilowatt hours. And then finally, with respect to program enhancements to meet the challenges, I think most of us who've been doing this for a long time, and I'm thinking, Ralph, of you in particular, but others that I see on this call, tend to be a fairly optimistic bunch. And while the challenges seem daunting to being able to ramp up energy efficiency to meet these decarbonization challenges, there are many reasons to believe that we can be successful at this. And I think a lot of those reasons trace to the enormous development in sensing, control, and analytic technology over the last 5 years or so, to the point that we can start to think less of energy efficiency as this fairly blunt force to reduce kilowatt hours and more in terms of smart energy, intelligent energy management that takes advantage of technology, allow us to manage energy consumption to optimize both the behavior of the system and the reduction of carbon emissions. And in the paper, we walk through 5 specific opportunities that this data and sensing revolution have enabled data and analytic techniques to improve the targeting of demand-side measures to the right customers at the right time in the right place. So no longer do we have to simply aim energy efficiency programs like a shotgun and hope it hits in the right place. We can use data and analytics to find those customers that yield most consumption reductions. The data analytics also allow us to personalize the delivery of energy efficiency programs, effectively creating segments of one. Utilities have been probably further behind than many industries in taking advantage of analytics to be able to do a much better job of segmentation. A lot of us still work in terms of these 5 or 6 or 8 broad segments. But in fact, using the data that are available to all of us, we can do a much, much better job of targeting what we offer to our customers to their specific preferences and circumstances. Third, I think we can greatly improve the EM&V process, evaluation, monitoring, and verification process in the industry using data analytics, again, to move away from this focus on individual participant savings to program-based savings. It really doesn't matter as we pursue these broad aims of decarbonization and grid management what any individual customer does. What matters is what the program does and whether it does what we need it to do. And thus, using these more advanced analytic techniques and better data, allows us to move away from counting widgets installed to measuring the actual program impacts. Fourth, the sensing and control technology now available to us will allow us, I think, to move away from these technology-based rebate programs to a greater emphasis on pay-for-performance programs, both at kind of the macro level where a utility will pay a contractor for savings realized, but also at the micro level where we ultimately will be able to move to a program design that allows a utility just directly to pay a customer for energy savings that she realizes as a result of action. We'll be able to use sensing and control technologies to move away from a focus on replacing equipment, which is what we've been doing for the last 40 years, to focus on making activity more efficient. So moving away from just an equipment-based focus to an activity-based focus that allows us really to concentrate on the objective. With that, Lisa, let me toss it back to you.
So thank you, Val. I think you provided a really great setup for the panel discussion that's going to happen. I just want to reiterate one of the things that you said, and that's taking advantage of data analytics to target energy efficiency to the right customers at the right time, in the right place on the system. I think that's super important. In the paper, I did mention the technology perspectives. That's sort of the second half of the paper. And I think all of those technology companies actually focus on that to some extent, the business of really engaging customers, targeting customers, having customers, targeting customers, how to really do it better. So again, I encourage you to take a look at the paper if you haven't. There's a lot of good food for thought there. We will be hearing from Scott from OPower today, who has a perspective in the paper. So with that, let me turn it over to Bob Rowe, CEO of Northwestern Energy. And co-chair of the Institute for Electric Innovation, to moderate the panel discussion. Bob.
Before Val was brought on board to do this great work, there were some good discussions recognizing that energy efficiency programs, despite some great successes, were stuck. And I think a lot of us were very frustrated that the opportunities in energy efficiency weren't being realized often as advocates and others went on to pursue whatever the new thing happened to be. What Val did in the paper was really lay out the obstacles and lay out a path to get past that unstuckedness and do some really meaningful work. There is so much to go back to and revisit in the paper. What always the business model and the efficiency goals, and Val nailed it. If you think about the way electric companies are redesigning and rebuilding their networks, it's extraordinary. The business model, however, continues to be driven by the regulatory model, the regular capital, and you pay for those fixed price assets through throughput. That's not the only model, but that is the model we're dealing with now. A companion paper for your bedtime reading, also commissioned by EEI, and I see Jeff Goldner, who chairs the state practice group. So that part of EEI commissioned a paper from Guidehouse, Electricity Regulation for a Customer-Centric Future. So as you read Val's paper and get excited about the direction that's charted, I do encourage you to look at that companion paper too, which provides a pretty good broad think it needs to go. So these are really companion efforts. Again, Val highlighted so many great points and so many great opportunities. A conversation I had a number of years ago with the head of an electric company that really runs great efficiency programs we would all model has come back to mind as Val has talked about the compliance focus. And basically this conversation was that our programs, as good as they are driven by compliance. We are necessarily much more focused on the negative incentives, of disallowance than we are on whatever very speculative positive incentives there might be. And as a result, the risks of operating these programs are so great, we're seriously considering walking away. Now, that fortunately did not happen, but I think that really gets to the point Val was making about all of us necessarily focusing on compliance, because that's where the regulatory model focuses. So again, that's enough of my preaching. Now we're going to hear from three folks who actually do know what they're talking about to continue this conversation. First, an old friend. We've been in the trenches together for, most of 4 decades, sometimes with some successes and always with a lot of fun. Ralph Cavanna, the Energy Co-Director, for supporting today's conversation. Mike Morelli, Vice President of the Business Customer Division at Southern California Edison. Again, a leader in the industry and certainly a leader in efficiency. And Scott Newman, the Group Vice President for OPower, which is part of the Oracle family of fine companies. And Oracle has a very good paper as part of this overall effort. So Mike, let's start with you. FCC and the other California companies have delivered efficiency programs to customers literally for decades, and why is energy efficiency vital to achieving a clean energy future in California? And then specifically, what is your company's role in making that happen?
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me today. So I think first and foremost, we believe that energy efficiency is essential to the clean energy future for probably all the reasons this group knows. The cleanest and cheapest form of energy is one that you don't have to produce. We're working, and there's a lot going on in California, and a lot of, I think, the policy pieces that Val mentioned, I think, are largely intact in California, although we certainly have some of our challenges as we transition to this focus on decarbonization. So Edison, we've proposed several policy changes to adapt to a decarbonization. In particular, we're requesting that goals be set to reduce GHG emissions. And we're also proposing a different shareholder incentive. There are some shareholder incentives in our energy efficiency programs today, but we're suggesting that those be tied to GHG reductions. And we've made great strides, and there's still a great amount that's possible in California. And again, I think we agree with a lot of comments that Val had in his paper and his opening comments here. There has been a lot of focus on the equipment side of it, and I still think there's certainly a role for new technologies as they come out to move into the market. But there's also a lot of learnings to share those best practices with customers. And I think utilities are in a unique position to help facilitate and deliver that information so that customers can make the best decisions to meet their business objectives. Additionally, we're fortunate in California that, the policymakers have opened up, if you will, this concept of beneficial electrification. I think we still have a lot of room to really make those available to the market, but we're hopeful in that regard. I deal with our customers directly, so I'm not a program designer. I'm not a regulatory advocate. I have a view into some of those and an influence into some of those. But my primary area of responsibility is delivering our programs with our customers. So at the end of the day, I'm looking for programs that really help our customers and respond to our customer needs. And it really is, and part of Val's paper that I didn't hear him emphasize was the customer-centric aspect of it. And I think we all have to think about, at the end of the day, it's the customer that needs to go along on part of this journey. And so that's hopefully another part that we're bringing to the party as well when these policy discussions are debated.
Mike, that's a great comment, and I appreciate you highlighting customers, because actually there again, that's an important part of EEI's current work. And in that spirit, Scott, Oracle has been working on behavioral economics and has really helped electric companies better engage with residential customers in particular, and in new ways. And there are times when that really matters. We're probably in such a time right now, but over the last decade, our sophistication, again, thanks to companies like yours as well as our own work, has really increased. So what more can we do to use efficiency effectively? And then what are some of the priority areas that you're looking at Oracle to help advance efficiency as a carbon?
Today, put simply, the priority area for us is at the intersection of AI and human behavior. Quickly decarbonizing the demand side means influencing more consumer behaviors faster and on a bigger scale than we ever had before. Frankly, that's why I joined OPower over 8 years ago, and why I'm still here today. I'm here with all of you today because I'm willing to bet all of us on this call chose this industry in no small part in order to do well by doing good. And what I mean by that is utilities have an obligation to serve all customers, And together we have an obligation to serve the planet. And committing to decarbonization is a good business strategy. If you do what's right, business strategy. If you do what's right for the customer, the financial performance will take care of itself. So it's a win for everyone. But there's still a lot of work to be done, to your question, and we see untapped potential in energy efficiency. And we're working hard to make energy efficiency vital to the decarbonization efforts. And we're going to do that in three ways: by delivering emissions reductions as fast as possible, coordinating those savings when the energy supply is at its dirtiest, and electrifying everything. So maybe if you don't mind, I'll unpack each of those three themes for a little bit. So the first is we're really focusing on what I call the time value of now in delivering savings. On the one hand, I'm fiercely proud of the 28 terawatt hours of energy savings that our utility clients have saved with their customers over the past decade. On the other hand, I'm here in front of you today to say it's just not enough. It's not. We need to deliver more if we're going to reach the decarbonization goals. And frankly, 2% annual savings is not enough. Driving adoption of all kinds of programs and devices, delivering savings when and where they're needed most, and doing all of this equitably and more digitally than ever. And so that's why changing human behavior, in my opinion, is about so much more than a paper home energy report, if you will. And so here's a few examples of late. Since COVID arrived, our clients have sent roughly 4 engagements on these tools is also seeing a significant increase, with open rates up nearly 10%. And this is important as more customers are stuck at home and bills are up 30 to 50% for many. And so these alerts proactively address very real bill anxiety and provide options to save for folks that otherwise don't think there are options. Another example is a Midwest utility where folks that otherwise don't think there are options. Another example is a Midwest utility where we ran a test this summer of layering weekly energy update emails on top of high bill alerts and paper home energy reports. And for 3 consecutive months, we saw another 1% of incremental savings from that treatment group. Third example is in 2019, we began piloting digital-only home energy report programs for customers who had never received a paper home energy report. And so far, those programs are achieving over 1.1% with only email HERs and high bill alerts. And that's during the ramp period, just 6 to 12 months high bill alerts. And that's during the ramp period, just 6 to 12 months into the program, where saving rates continue to climb. Said differently, like 1.1%, it's the floor, not the ceiling on that program. And so I share those examples, but don't get me wrong. Paper has a role to play because everyone has a billing address. But as these examples show, digital gives us more reach, more touch. More touch points, more opportunities to prompt behavior change in order to reduce waste, shift use, and accelerate the adoption of all these efficient electrified pieces of equipment that we're talking about. So that's the first theme I wanted to cover. The second is, and Val certainly touched on this more eloquently than I can, but we are focused now more than ever on when savings are achieved. The emissions intensity of a megawatt hour of energy is not uniform. It depends on when you save that energy. And most utilities, frankly, that we work with just assume an amount of emissions reduction, energy savings into emissions reductions. And the rules encourage this deeming of emissions reductions for demand-side resources. And in my view, it's just not a feasible approach as we try and tackle a once-in-a-generation problem. And so we at OPower are working hard to just kick the tires on how accurate these approximations are. Locational emissions. We're going to find out how accurate these emissions factors are. Are they overestimating, underestimating? Are they getting it roughly right? We look forward to sharing those results with you guys in a future session. But I do think one thing we can agree on in this vein is that with the intermittency of renewables, load shaping is becoming an absolute necessity. And one way we're doing that, or tackling that, I should say, at OPower is with our behavioral load shaping solution. It offers sort of personalized coaching that conveys the benefit of shifting usage at certain times of the day. And more specifically, it provides customers a personal comparison of their usage in peak versus non-peak hours, resulting in load shift and overall load reduction. And we've seen some incredible results so far. In one rollout with Evergy, 75% of customers that receive the behavioral load shaping reports opened and engaged with them. And so that's a huge result that shaping reports opened and engaged with them. And so that's a huge result. I think that shows the promise of this unique technology. But it's just a start. Like ultimately, we need the ability to shape load down to the millisecond. I mean, like for a long time, we've been talking about load shaping, I think with little specificity, and I think we need to get specific. We need to get it down to the milliseconds. But as with specific, we need to get it down to the milliseconds. But as with most anything in this industry that involves energy customers, we need to take them on a journey, get them comfortable with solutions like behavioral load shaping, and then prompt them to surrender greater control to shaping load through automation in order to save them money, and frankly, to save them mind share. That's the second thing. The third one I want to touch on is really around using our understanding of humans to spur the electrification of everything. And the solution to our carbon problem is replacing fossil fuel electric supply with renewables and then electrifying everything we can. And I just on renewable generation when we talk about decarbonization, but the price point of renewables seems like it's fallen to a point where it's largely economical in its space, and it's going to happen in most places. And more importantly, renewables aren't enough. So to achieve this 100% decarbonization goal by 2050, we need electrified equipment, and we need it fast. And two of the areas where I see, so maybe we can dig into transportation as an example for a minute. Like, I often ask myself, are we doing enough to spur adoption of EVs? Today at Opower, we have the ability to detect EV owners with 97% accuracy. So we can get those people on the right rate plans. We can coach them, enroll them in programs and what have you. But considering we're going to need an incredible amount of people buying EVs over the next couple of decades, we need to do more to just get them in garages. And in every fossil fuel vehicle that is purchased right now instead of an EV, I believe costs a utility thousands of dollars. Of an EV, I believe costs a utility thousands of dollars in terms of lost value. So while detection of EVs is important, we need to expand our thinking. And this is where I think the role, frankly, of the utility in accelerating beneficial EV adoption is pretty obvious to me. And I think we need to be running a lot more pilots and building a body of evidence right now that will make it obvious to commissions as well. We need to prove that utilities can accelerate the adoption of EVs, smart chargers, charging plans, and managed charging programs. And if we do this, I think we can fast forward a few years, the pilots are run, the case is made, the commissions are on board, and I'm really excited about the utility is partnering with a major car manufacturer. And when one of your customers buys an EV, they're also offered a smart charger, an offer to enroll in a rate that's tailored to EV owners, and it's all done in one shot. That's the kind of pace we need. And once they opt in and reap the benefits of that rate, you automate the charging process, which will allow handling payments for charging stations, even third-party ones, to reduce the customer friction when charging across providers. A very real friction, by the way. I own an EV, and it's always a hot mess when I show up at a new third-party provider, and it's like 10 minutes with a crying toddler in the background to try and plug my card in. And I really think a utility is incredibly well-positioned to strip away that friction, to then enable like a single energy bill experience, and importantly, I think to provide relief to LMI customers that want to have EVs. The way I think about it is almost like a utility co easy pass for EV charging, and I get excited about things like that. So, I guess the point I leave with is I feel like this is so much more than a Shopify storefront where someone purchases a smart thermostat and enrolls in a DR program they might participate in 3 to 5 times a year. Now, that stuff is important, don't get me wrong, but we're talking about getting millions of cars burning gas off the road, and replaced by EVs, in doing charging in a manner that's beneficial for both the grid and the customer. And that's a real win-win as far as I'm concerned. All right, back to you, Bob.
Scott, you covered a lot of ground, no surprise at all. Just a couple of things to highlight there. First, a chat came up about the role of utilities in EVs. I always refer to the role in creating an ecosystem. You did essentially the same thing. I think it's notable that last week all of the EEI member companies announced their own fleet goals, and in fact, there's a lot of very, very good work being done within EEI on electrification as well, both over the road and various kinds of fleets. So a great topic. And consumer work, and really talking about customer journeys and kind of a design thinking approach But where you started really touched a nerve for me, doing well by doing good. And I sincerely can't think of any industry that is more, to my old friend Ralph. I think, Ralph, that was probably one of your early insights in making a decision really at the start of your career to figure out ways to work with electric and gas companies to align their interest with what you believed was an important public outcome, so they would in fact be able to do well by doing good. And you've been resolute with that focus over the decades. We still have a long way to go down that path, but we have made some progress. So with your background, made some progress. So with your background, I'm really eager to hear your thoughts on the paper.
Well, this is a wonderful forum that Lisa and Tom have created. I believe that my function on the panel clearly is mostly just to cheer up Val and Bob, a task I have cheerfully assumed for a lifetime. I do continue steadfast in my conviction that utilities are essential clean energy partners, not essential clean energy monopolists, not entities that have to own and control all aspects of the transition, but entities that are uniquely well positioned to speed it forward and likely to succeed. I do think that's a fundamental point here. I want to acknowledge, in addition, that this is an audience full of people who, many of whom have, like me, been rethinking energy efficiency for more than 40 years now. And we're going to be more than motivated to continue doing it. The reason for, apart from something Tom Kuhn reminded me at the outset of the forum, he wanted to know if I remembered what Dick Cheney had said about energy conservation 20 years ago. And what Cheney said was, Tom, conservation may be a sign of personal virtue, but it is not a sufficient basis for a sound, comprehensive energy policy. Now, I am based on a record that all of you have helped compile over the past 20 years. I could change his mind on that, particularly since in the context of decarbonization, because this is the real impetus, the wind behind our sails that's going to push all of us forward. Every serious assessment of decarbonization indicates a credible and reliable way without a massive contribution from cost-effective energy efficiency and demand response. It turns out that if your objective is to decarbonize the economy, the aggregate value of energy efficiency and demand response increases. It doesn't go down. And that is true even though the grid itself is, of course, becoming steadily less carbon intensive, because you've got more and more work for the grid to do. And what energy efficiency is making possible is assuming all of those new responsibilities without crashing the system. Those of us who watched the Western grid through its travails over three recent weeks of two massive regional heat waves had any number of reminders of that. So yes, but the one thing I want to say in terms of the value of energy efficiency is there's still value in knocking loads down for an enduring period of time. It's not all the value is flexible hour to hour. Not all the value is flexible hour to hour. And Bob Rowe knows that very well because of all of the important work that Northwestern and other Northwest utilities doing now on the value of seasonal storage, on the importance of being able to handle long-term fluctuations, not just short-term. In output and in availability make to solving that problem is not yet fully understood, but I predict that it will be massive. We will also find a host of new end uses where energy efficiency can make a contribution. If we're talking about vehicle electrification, we absolutely want to be paying attention to the energy efficiency of the vehicles. Remember, a snub-nosed little GM electric vehicle 90s, which got about 4 miles per kilowatt hour. The average fuel economy of the electric vehicle fleet today is about 3.4 miles per kilowatt hour. There is plenty of room for improvement. And that is one of a host of illustrations. Of a proposition that I think my friend Val Jensen might concede if subjected to extreme coercion, which is that a lot of the low-hanging fruit actually grows back. And we are just at the threshold of figuring out what to do with the vampire loads that draw refrigerators worth of power from individual American households, while they are turned off. The final thing I want to say by way of introduction is to celebrate utilities over the past few decades, and Val and Bob are perfect illustrations of this, have done a lot more than write rebate checks. They have created what Bob done a lot more than write rebate checks. They have created what Bob would want me to call, and I do believe is, a vibrant ecosystem for innovation and energy efficiency. Val Jensen founded the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. Bob Rose, Northwestern Energy, was a co-founder of the Northwest Energy Efficiency. Rose, Northwestern Energy, was a co-founder of the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. The Consortium for Energy Efficiency, the Alliance to Save Energy, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy have all benefited from the cooperation and the support of everyone on this call. We're going to need to do plenty more of that. This call. We're going to need to do plenty more of that. But the fact that those institutions are there, the fact that they're energized by all of you, and the fact that they are turning their attention now to all of these issues is one of my strongest reasons for optimism here, as is the fact that I know all of you are going to and the efficiency standards for building and equipment that lock in those gains. And Bob Rowe, one of my proudest moments in the history of NRDC's engagement with utilities came last year when all the major utilities in the country, publicly owned and investor owned, co-signed a statement to the US Department of Energy in support and under attack. This was not an easy thing to do. And that statement was submitted to the Department of Energy for its record by Northwestern Energy. Thank you, Bob.
Ralph, I'm going to stay with you for just a minute, given your incredible history, but I'm going to take you back to one of the proposals Mike highlighted. If you could talk about any states where the policy objectives and the cost benefit tools are really fully in place to support efficiency as a carbon resource. Who do you think is furthest along? Who should we be looking to?
Yeah, and I think what I want to refer to
should we be looking to?
Yeah, and I think what I want to refer to, I think it's a decarbonization resource, Bob. I suggest a slight adjustment terminology for decarbonization resource. A number of trying to get there. I think what emerges from Val's paper rather clearly is that I can't say anyone shines. I can say that I think the states that are doing the best are Washington and Oregon in the Northwest, California trying at least with plenty still to do. And there are some bright spots in the Northeast. I think the Rhode Island Commission has been particularly strong of late, Bob, and I'm here, I think, is that regulators as a whole have not been paying as much attention to these issues as they were 20 or 30 years ago. And we've suffered from that. And the reason I know we're going to turn that around is I look at a regulator like Dave Danner, who's as strong as anyone in the country on decarbonization as an imperative, are going to play the role they need to play. He's got to pay a fair amount of attention to the business model issues and the cost effectiveness tests. And I also think, Bob, that there is one region that has come closer to getting the verification and measurement issues right than any other. And I want Val Jensen to include it in the next edition of his paper, because what he calls EM&V 2.0, the Regional Technical Forum of the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, which is to have an impartial group of experts serve as a secular priesthood on energy efficiency measurement and verification and wring a lot of the adversarial nonsense out of the system. That model is also followed effectively in the Northeast.
Val, I think you've got your next paper outlined for you, so we're looking forward to that. Mike, I want to go back to you now, and this is a little bit of follow-up too, really. You were partnering with the University of California and I think also with Cal State on a clean energy optimism. What can the rest of us and also our regulators outside of California learn?
Well, thank you, Bob, for the question. This is a program I'm really proud of. Despite all our aggressive GHG emission reduction goals in California, we don't program that actually measures and incents on GHG reductions. So we propose to change that with this new innovative, and it aligns a lot with what Val was talking about on a pay-for-performance pilot. I think it's important to note that this program came through collaboration with our customers, and we have different advisory panels around different issues, and Cal State and University of California sit on one of our panels, and we were having a side conversation at one of our panels, and they were frustrated on some of the pain points of our energy efficiency programs, and had those didn't align with their goals, which were highly carbon based. And we basically just whiteboarded something on the side and said, why don't we propose something? So through the pilot, and it was really unique because it was Southern California Edison, and our customers actually wrote and sponsored testimony for the pilot as well. So it was very unique from that perspective of actually having customers go with you to the commission. And by the way, we did extensive stakeholder outreach as well. And I think that's really important, certainly in California, is to bring those stakeholders along. But essentially, pilot, we expect to learn the effectiveness of just simply measuring greenhouse gas incentives. Now, that's easier said than done. When we talk about MV&E 2.0, I think that's a large part of this. We're looking at, in essence, drawing a line around the campus environment and saying, okay, what is your GHG emission inventory around electric and gas, and then measuring those inputs, time differential around electric and gas, and then measuring those inputs time differentiated, as I think Scott was mentioning. And then how does that track from year over year? We're hoping to learn, over year. We're hoping to learn, actually what happens. So how do you turn this control, if you will, from measure by measure over to the customer and say, what works best for you? Is it behavior, equipment? Is it, X, Y, or Z? It's really turning it over to the customer and standing back and measuring the results. So it's a real collaborative effort. And part of that is understanding how the customer processes those. So we really think the framework will provide a lot of information, which we've agreed to share. So we have, again, a lot of stakeholder sharing mechanisms out of it. And we hope to learn a lot on, if you just stand back and you measure outcomes, what really happens. I think, we got a lot of questions on how or why did we pick the universities. And we think they were a pilot for this because it has almost every time you structure water use. It's kind of like a little commercial cooking, office space, hospitals, labs, very diverse end uses. So it gives us an opportunity to, again, see how that shapes into a GHG emissions reduction strategy. I do have to say, we proposed this a couple of years ago. The pandemic has certainly thrown us a curveball when we talk about impact on, broader communities. The campus community is certainly not in any kind of state of normal. So we've had to take a little bit of a pause here, and we're trying to figure out how we have to shift our MV&E to really judge that. So time will tell, but I still think it'll be a little bit a great learning experience when all's said and done. The other thing unique about the campus environment is they probably have one of the most engaged set of stakeholders that you'll find in a customer group. Not only researchers that are on campus, but the students are very active and very passionate about sustainability. And so the customers are looking at how to engage those stakeholders to help support the testing of the concepts and other innovative strategies. So even though we've had to take a big pause here for COVID, we still are very excited about this focus, and we're hoping, we can either take pieces of this or take the concept to other segments of our customer group. Obviously, this isn't kind of a mass markets, everybody residential, but we do think there are a lot of applications where this could be applied, certainly in our larger customer segments.
So really deep work with those particular highly engaged customers, and you hope to learn things from that to scale up.
Exactly, and I think to Val's point and others, kilowatt and kilowatt hours and therms, quite frankly, but we're really looking at that currency here is greenhouse gas emission reductions that we've kind of flipped the currency on in this particular demo. I should also, I think there was reference that SMUD, has changed their focus on GHG reductions. I know one of the discussions we've had internally is, our regulator or this decision requires that we measure kilowatts and kilowatt hours. But, quite frankly, what we've said internally is that doesn't mean you can't report out on GHG impacts. So even if your programs are shaped on one metric, if you think there are incremental metrics to report on, I would encourage the utilities to figure out how to calculate that internally, and then B, you figure out how you may want to include that as incremental information to your policymakers or your stakeholders. Your policymaker to tell you that we're going to incent on GHG.
I appreciate you. When we first, Al's paper, I was a veteran, of course, to participate in that discussion, and there's an awful lot we can learn as highly regulated investor owns from other companies, whether it's publics or the co-ops that we have so many of in our area, simply because there isn't a disintermediating layer of policy and regulation. They can be often more nimble. Pricing structures are not nearly as dependent on throughput, things like things like that. So we all have a lot to learn from one another. Scott, I'd like
and I don't know if you saw the news yesterday, but we actually announced that Nicole Howard, as the Chief Commercial Officer at SMUD, is joining Southern California Edison. Nicole Howard, as the Chief Commercial Officer at SMUD, is joining Southern California Edison as our customer programs and services vice president. So I think we stole a page a little bit deeper than that. So we're gonna go bring that talent internally, and we're really excited to have her join the company here in November.
Great move, and congratulations. Actually, at Northwestern, our parallel person comes from a co-op background as well, and she certainly brings that focus. Scott, I want to go deeper with some of your comments. These design and deliver the behavioral efficiency programs that do attempt to support structural, deep, and long-lasting energy and carbon reductions. I'd take us just a little bit deeper on that, if you would.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. By the way, Mike's answer was fascinating. Thanks, Mike. So where investment was being shifted to structural energy efficiency, that is upgrades that deliver savings for up to 30 years over behavioral energy efficiency. And Obviously, admittedly, we're a little biased here, but it didn't quite feel right to us. And so we asked the analysis group not too long ago to really take a list of different energy efficiency programs in delivering the highest greenhouse gas reduction value. And what they found, and I encourage everyone to read the paper, is that behavioral energy efficiency achieves the same amount of carbon dioxide emission reductions as structural energy efficiency in less time. And three of what I find to be the particularly compelling results they surfaced. And so first, they found that behavioral EE, or what I might call BEE, delivers climate change benefits at a fraction of the cost of structural EE programs, or SEE. An analysis of BEE programs delivered by a large utility in the eastern U.S. found that it avoided carbon dioxide. Large utility in the eastern U.S. found that it avoided carbon dioxide emissions at about 1/4 of the cost of SEE programs. Second, BEE programs deliver results up to 5 times faster than SEE programs. So with this same utility, the analysis group, examined it in the BEE utility. The analysis group, examined it in the BEE program, delivered an equivalent level of lifetime avoided climate damages as the SEE program, but in 3 to 4 years, as the 20 or more years that the SEE program required. And I think this important sort of this point of speed of savings, I really want to belabor savings as soon as possible for a few reasons. One is that much like a bank account, savings compound, but we're also in a race against the clock to avoid critical tipping points around, greenhouse gas emissions in 2030 and 2050. And I think the third thing here is just that, the further out emissions reductions, just as the generation mix increasingly shifts towards renewables. So speed matters. The third thing is that BEE programs were found to be more inclusive. They're actually one of the few utility-supported measures that benefit a broad reach of residential customers, nearly everyone, in fact. And this is important because BEE programs are proven to reach your low to moderate income customers, yet critical population engaged, particularly right now. Now, I want to be clear, these findings don't point whatsoever, in my view, to choosing BEE over SEE programs or vice versa. In fact, the research really spelled out that I think is powerful that, they cited a 9% bump in SEE programs that could 9% bump in SEE programs that could be attributed to promotion, virtuous cycle here. And we can't get caught up in just being competitive, but they do also suggest value in continuing both programs and increasing investment in BEE where possible. And the way I think about it, especially amidst COVID, is that BEE can be used to prime the pump for SEE measures when COVID restrictions lift. And maybe let me give you an example to drive the point home. For a long time, we've been using in-home energy assessments to draw attention to SEE programs and drive people to adopt related changes. But with COVID and luckily, Power, we got to jump on this back in 2019 when Mid-American took its in-person assessment program completely online with Power. And we invited Mid-American customers to take the online assessment. We tried to make it really fast and really easy to do it. And then Mid-American shipped them a tailored energy efficiency kit based on their answers. And they're on pace, which is 6 times more than their in-home assessment program ever served in a single year. And so what I think we fundamentally discovered is that there's, the more completions leads to more data, which can then be used to, serve up AI-powered recommendations and next best actions. And it results in more leads for structural programs to fund when COVID lifts and to put people back to jobs. So I'm excited about those findings. Back to you, Bob.
Great. I don't know if you were watching chat while you were speaking, but people are using that really effectively, and your paper has already been shared with the group. So good work, everyone. Already been shared with the group. So good work, everyone. Back a quarter past, we'll come back and Adam will be sure that we've covered all of or as many as we can of the questions and comments that are coming up in chat. Mike and Scott, kind of staying with the customer focus, how do we make energy management programs just as seamless and engaging for our customers as we can? And this is something that electric companies are trying to do really just across the spectrum of customer interactions. We're obviously expecting us continue to focus on the customer experience and that seamless transaction.
look, I'm happy to jump in briefly, Mike, and then maybe hand it to you if that's all right.
Yeah.
I think first thing we need to do, no pun intended, is demand more out of the demand side of the equation. There's to being a champion for the role of the demand side going forward. And it starts by changing customer behavior with, as a lot of you have said, personalized content, curated journeys, and energy insights embedded into the everyday customer experience. Now, it's an easy thing to say. It's a much harder thing to do. And it requires high levels, deeply high levels of personalization, which can only be delivered, I think, by combining an innate understanding of humans and advanced technology like artificial intelligence. At OPower, AI isn't just a buzzword. At OPower, AI isn't just a buzzword. And it's also not a synonym for just disaggregation or a pie chart showing different appliances in the home. We use AI to generate the core energy insights that capture attention, as well as the personalized recommendations that guide action. But AI is personalized recommendations that guide action. But AI is not enough. Like OPower, works by influencing people to act when they're often not even thinking about acting. And that takes applied behavioral science. It takes techniques like social proof, agency, salience, ease, benefits, and even emerging ones like moments of pride. Like last year, there's this really cool study published in the Journal of Psychology and Marketing, and it found that if you get customers to recall a sense of pride in previous environmentally friendly actions they took, they're more likely to take another one in the future. They're more likely to take another one in the future because it creates this sense of anticipation of pride that they want to feel in the future. And so we're testing that right now with our new and improved version of the OPower Home Energy Reports that we're sending to 2.5 million customers to continue to test and evolve our behavioral toolkit. But as I've said before, we know that we can do so much more than reduce energy consumption by 2%. We can spur, with our utility partners, important actions like buying an EV, making structural upgrades to a home, or enrolling in time of use programs. But only when you combine the two. That's when the real magic happens. When you combine a real rich understanding of how humans behave when it comes to energy with AI. In Weirdo Power, it's just excited to be a driving force behind this utility part. So those are my thoughts. Maybe over to you.
First way, make sure the programs are seamless for the customers, a challenge silos of excellence, and make sure we're having it's a customer point of view, and for all good, well-meaning, end purposes, but we'll end up with a lighting program that will have different requirements than an HVAC on, what's the deadline to submit, how is it done, and it's like, to be honest with you, it's just nonsense. And if you look at it from a customer perspective, they don't care if it's a lighting or an HVAC and why one program manager does it one way or the other. We have to really make sure we're thinking of it in that customer experience perspective, and that we're making our programs easy to understand, easy to implement, and easy to administer. And I think, we have a very large portfolio at Southern California Edison. We're very proud of that. But sometimes that creates challenges when you have a single customer that's cutting across multiple aspects of it. So we have to start with that, I think, introspective review and make sure we are really designing that. And then we need to bring that perspective to our commissions. I mean, quite frankly, the commission has a lot on their plate. I think the utilities are uniquely, and not just utilities, but the third parties as well, are uniquely positioned to bring that customer perspective into the policy arena. I think sometimes we're, bait perfection at the expense of good in the policy. And we really need to figure, someone will call time out to be aligned. I think again in California, I think we have a lot of good result if we can come to agreement with our stakeholders and say, here's the way we think it should be done, or here's the proposal, is really, really important. And sometimes that means compromise on your individual position. I do agree with Scott. Time is our enemy, and we do need to move with a sense of urgency. And I don't feel like we're doing that as an industry as quickly as we need to. In California, we have 2030 goals. 2030 is 9 years away. That's not 9 years to put a program in place. That's 9 years to deliver results. And so we need to get with the getting there. And I think that starts by listening to our customers. And whether it's residential or business customers, very few of our customers wake up in the morning wanting to deep dive into energy efficiency, policy nuance, program regulations. They're looking for us to make it easy for them to digest. I know we have EEI, the Customer Advisory Group. I think it's a fantastic forum to collect feedback. And, what I hear from those forums is, I have a very small group. I may have a national footprint, and I have 4 people to manage all our energy and sustainability efforts across the U.S. So I'm not going to spend a day a week in Southern California Edison's programs. You gotta get me through that with 1 hour a week of focus on that. So we need to be very efficient on how we represent and deliver those programs and opportunities so our customers can digest it, make decisions, and move on in those programs. So, I think really listening to our customers is key in that.
I have one final question for each of you, and then we'll turn it over. I have one final question for each of you, and then we'll turn it over to group discussion, so we can be pretty focused in our answers here. First, for Mike, what are the structural changes needed inside an electric company to move forward? And then Scott, you can be thinking essentially about the same question. How can you at Opower Oracle support those changes? And then Ralph, I'm going to ask you to give us our marching orders. So Mike?
All right. I think key is our EE and our demand side programs. Quite frankly, we're over in customer service and didn't need to really interface or talk to other parts of the company. As we move forward, energy procurement, our transmission distribution, regulatory and legal folks, our goal to how to effectively deliver the best programs. So, ultimately, we're trying to deliver programs that are cost effective and deliver carbon savings with the least cost, and that can't be accomplished without adequate knowledge of the market and the grid. And so we have those experts in our company. We just need to bring them along for that journey as well.
Great. Scott?
Yeah, happy to weigh in. So we think about this both as like a technology needed. Going back to these rolling blackouts in California, we saw this demand response take a appropriately elevated role in the state that maybe traditionally hasn't done that much with DR. And so huge props to utilities like SCE for making it a priority. But we have a lot of work to do before the potential of DR is fully realized, because it's a bit of a muddled mess right now. You have lots of, you can call a BDR event through Opower, a BYOD event through Energy Hub, smart home events through Powerly, really complex events, the AutoGrid. But it's a manual process to run a portfolio of demand management programs. And so this might be appropriate at a pilot stage where you're trying to test and kind of make decisions about whether and what kind of event stage where you're trying to test and kind of make decisions about whether and what kind of events to call. But ultimately, we're working with our partners to think about enabling aggregated resource dispatch, because the way I think about it is utilities ultimately need, if you'll forgive me, like one big red easy button to hit to get the kind of operational efficiency and reliable program performance you'll need button to hit to get the kind of operational efficiency and reliable program performance you'll need. That's one point. The second is, as we look a little bit further ahead, the complexity of demand management and the speed with which you need to optimize the network, it's going to outstrip very quickly what a human can do, particularly with all the DERs coming online. So ultimately, another big piece, having a platform that can autonomously optimize your network by controlling DERs in real time. And that really gets down to like an AI-powered network management system that analyzes conditions and in real time balances supply and demand. So that's where we're excited to work with our partners, and broader colleagues at Oracle Utilities to realize that solution. I think the other thing, is real needs for regulatory change. And I think three themes that continue to pop out here are just, first, we need regulators and utilities working together to integrate GHG-focused metrics for evaluating the design, budgeting, and performance of utility EE programs. Second, I firmly believe it's almost related to net present value avoided greenhouse gas emissions by maintaining annual savings targets in addition to sort of lifetime targets. Because again, emissions reduced today are more important than emissions reduced 10, 20, 30 years from now. And third, I think we need regulators to design performance incentives that simultaneously maximize cost effectiveness savings and greenhouse gas benefits. We all know that utilities respond to the right performance incentives, and so it's a real priority to get it right. But I think, stepping back, I'm going to leave one point here. It's like we got to address both the technology and the regulatory policy framework in parallel.
Great. I'm going to insert my editorial comment here, kind of actually, Scott, springboarding off your discussion of behavioral economics. We've got a 19th century pricing model, effectively, the low conservation signal, essentially, but that's the root of an awful lot of problems. Ralph, you've been the most tireless and effective advocate for decoupling. That's a Band-Aid, and it's a good Band-Aid. It's an important one, but still, I think Scott in particular raised some pretty provocative questions, thoughtful in how we price and what we signal to our customers. But my question to you, before we hand it back to Lisa and Adam, is really give us our marching orders. What are the next steps to effectively go down this path? And you're pretty good at tactics as well as strategy. So off to you.
Well, the entire plan is contained in the joint statement of NRDC and the Edison Electric Institute to the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners in 2018. So I'm going to begin by just asking Lisa to put that in the chat, please, so people can see it. Bob, what I'd say, and I'm looking at the responses in the margins also, we have to together harness responses in the margins also. We have to together harness this irresistible momentum toward decarbonization for both the building model reforms and the program reforms and the efficiency standards changes. And in doing that, in the near term, we're going to have, starting in January, I predict collectively, lots of opportunities to upgrade the efficiency standards, restore their momentum, both state and federal levels, and build in demand response in addition to energy efficiency. We're going to be able to work together to integrate beneficial electrification with traditional energy efficiency objectives. That is not going to be a heavy lift. It's also not going to require a return to a commodity-based model. All of us have agreed we've got to break out of that. And I'm going to forgive you for calling revenue decoupling a Band-Aid, Bob. I'm sure what you really meant to say was that it's a Band-Aid, Bob. I'm sure what you really meant to say was that it's a fundamental shift in the entire understanding internally and externally of what the business is all about. It's vital to shifting from a commodity to a service orientation. It's not the whole solution, but it is emphatically part of the solution.
It's a great step.
Reforms. Let's emerge reaffirmed in our joint commitment to work across the board, the performance-based incentives, the removal of the commodity model, and the shift toward a whole system that recognizes utilities as essential clean energy partners and lets them thrive at it.
Great. Three incredibly knowledgeable and experienced people. Lisa, Adam, back to you.
The decarbonization imperative will make it easier to do this because it will readjust cost effectiveness calculations. But if we want to move quickly, my suggestion is that we do something that Bob Rowe helped lay a foundation for more than 3 decades ago. Focus on the low-income traditional straitjacket of cost effectiveness and focus the initial deep retrofit areas there, which will also advance equity agendas that are increasingly important to many in the process and to the regulators themselves. And then from the experience that we'll get by doing a lot of that well, because a lot of this depends on enhancing its scale, we can take more advantage of the fact that we should be and will be getting credit for the CO2 savings. And we should be looking at a cost effectiveness orientation that is focused primarily on what the utility is spending to get the benefit, rather than what everyone is spending, because the utility can then combine multiple sources of financing. Teresa Drake, I see, is in the audience, and IDA perspective on assessing utilities' ability to invest. That will help with deep retrofits.
Sure. Thanks. Other thoughts from the panel?
The only thing I'll add on is Ralph raised a really important point, is how in these programs as we go forward, and extremely important. And I really like that approach. I think, these 2 code savings, the only thing I would add to that is we need to figure out the equivalent on the non-res side, to focusing on the low income on the res side, but bringing our disadvantaged communities, make sure they're part of these programs is really important.
Lisa had an interesting question about, should we let customers choose their goal and then let the utilities work it out on how to provide? I mean, it sounds like, Mike, that maybe what's happening in some ways with your pilot, but sometimes the customer and the signal that you give them, right? Price, Scott, to your point, sort of, pride or a good sensation, or environmental point, sort of, pride or a good sensation, or environmental progress. We all kind of assess value differently. So how do we kind of, make this more of a customer-centric transformation as well?
I agree. It's and I also agree with Val and Scott's comments on analytics. I think there's much more that can be done in that space, and maybe that's a way that we collect and gather up that customer perspective. But also do it in a cost-effective way. Obviously, CEOP, we're spending a ton of time with the customer, understanding their needs and designing that. That wouldn't be appropriate for all 5 million of our customers. So we need to figure out a way to leverage that data and analytics for different segments.
Yeah. If I could add to that, I completely agree with Mike's point around the importance of data analytics. But the only other thing I'd say that I think applies to the residential customer is, even today, in a world where I think as an industry, we sometimes exaggerate the mind share that your average residential customer gives to energy. And so there's a lot of talk, I think, in this forum and others around like sprinting towards either empowering the customer to dictate what they need or sprinting towards automation. When in reality, I think we have to think about this as a customer and AI and other insights to serve up rich energy insights. So in a short period of time, a residential customer can have an aha moment, and then you walk them along baby steps, right? Like you don't immediately push them to strip out their old refrigerator and put in a new one, let alone, get a new EV. It starts with like, turn the lights off when you leave the room, change your thermostat, just show you the benefit of enrolling that in an automation program. And when they do, follow up with them to reinforce that benefit. So to the psychology point I was talking about earlier, they're excited and leaning into the next opportunity to save.
We have a few minutes left. I think I'll turn it back over to to address other unanswered questions and our takeaways after the session.
All I will say is thanks very much to everyone for participating in the chat. That was extremely informative, and thanks for posting those papers quickly. Starting with Val and then all three of the discussants, this has been just an hour and a half or so.